Israeli strikes on Gaza target another UN school, massacring 11 people as the day's death toll climbs to over 120. Zionist troops withdraw from most of Gaza as Palestinian resistance groups shower Israeli settlements with rocket fire. The Lebanese army says that militant attacks on a town near the Syrian border, which killed 11 soldiers, were meticulously planned. And militants in Iraq turned their guns on the Kurds, taking the country's biggest dam and several oil fields. Hello there, you're watching Gali Tijah World News and I'm Fatima Basim. In yet another attack marking blatant disregard for international law and human rights, the Israelis bombed another UN school during their assault on the Gaza Strip. 11 people were killed and 30 others injured in the attack on the school, sheltering at least 3,000 Palestinians in Rafah city. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon belatedly condemned the massacre, calling it a moral outrage and a criminal act. Meanwhile, UNRWA's director in Gaza said the United Nations had warned the Israelis about the location of the school in Rafah a total of 33 times. This as other Israeli attacks in the city killed 71 people. The continued collective punishment of people in Rafah resulted in the killing of 11 people from the same family. On the 27th day of the brutal Israeli assault in Gaza, at least 126 Palestinians were killed. The Zionist aerial sea and land assault targeted a number of cities in Gaza. Airstrikes on a mosque in Gaza City killed 4 more people, while an attack on a house in Khan Yunis killed 2 others. During the 4-week offensive, over 1,830 Palestinians were killed and nearly 10,000 others were wounded. The dire humanitarian situation in the besieged Gaza Strip is deteriorating by the hour. With fuel shortages and a lack of basic goods, the lives of residents in the coastal enclave are made even more difficult.
27 days of brutal Israeli aggression has left the besieged Gaza Strip in total ruins, fast creating a humanitarian disaster. This has become a recurrent scene in neighborhoods across Gaza, mothers wailing, children orphaned, and families torn apart. The cemetery has become the liveliest place in the city following the ongoing assault against civilians.
Children and women are laying in hospitals. Others are being treated at home.
Every other day, Palestinians in the occupied Strip flood the streets of their town to mourn a loved one they have lost due to the Israeli entity's so-called right to defend itself. So far, more than 1,850 people, including innocent children, have been slaughtered in the non-stop violence. Gaza has been cut off from the rest of the world. It is now in dire need of fuel after Israeli tanks destroyed the region's only power plant and left around 80% of the Strip's population without territory.
Due to continuous conflict, we cannot get enough fuel from outside. Now the whole Gaza area is facing gas and diesel shortages. Also, our only power plant was destroyed, leaving us out of power supply and also affecting the operation of our gas station. Now we have to rely on our own power generator that lets us operate for only several hours a day.
Lack of basic needs is another problem people in Gaza are facing. Outside bakeries, Palestinians struggle to meet their everyday necessities as they wait for hours, forming long queues just to buy bread.
It is not only a shortage of bread. We don't have electricity, water, nothing. Of course we have a shortage of bread. People have been here since the morning. In order to buy bread for 2 shekels, they have to wait 10 hours.
The war in Gaza has also internally displaced at least 254,000 people. These refugees wake up to a new hardship every day.
There are hundreds of families in the UN Refugee Agency schools, and they are putting 50 people in one classroom, and still we are not safe. They have bombarded a school in Bet Hanoun and another in Jabalia. 2 days ago, that school was bombed. Why? Where are the Arab states?
A temporary truce may give people in Gaza enough time to survive, but it is the lifting of the blockade that is the only way that their lives will ever return to normal.
Well, the Israeli bombardment on Gaza has not only killed thousands, but led to the destruction of 41 mosques. Bassam Latrash reports now on the Israeli attempt to destroy the right of Palestinians to worship.
Their mosques may lie in ruins, but their faith has not been shaken. Despite the Israeli strike against these mosques in the Gaza Strip, Palestinians are still performing their prayers.
Where is democracy and international laws? Freedom of worship. Mosques are for prayer. It is not a threat or a military target.
This is a Susi mosque in Ash-Shati refugee camp, one of dozens leveled by the Zionist war machine. As is usually the case with the Israeli offensives against Palestinians, mosques and other places of worship become targets of warplanes and artillery. According to the Ministry of Religious Affairs, 41 mosques have been completely destroyed and another 120 partly damaged.
None of us here are even affiliated to any political factions. Their objective is to destroy people and mosques. This is a criminal state with no mercy even when it comes to place of worship. The Nazis did not do what Israel is doing.
But the residents in Gaza refuse to give up their right to worship. As a matter of fact, people here say that they will emerge out of the rubble to rebuild the mosques which have been destroyed.
Children came on Friday after the mosque was bombed to memorize Quran. Though the place was wrecked, but we insisted on continuing. Nothing will prevent us from praying, not even war plans.
That sentiment is echoed across the coastal enclave, with many here blaming the Israelis for not only working to destroy Gaza's infrastructure, but also attempting to destroy the heritage and culture of the Palestinian people. The destruction of places of worship is not a new tactic adopted by Zionist aggression. Many Palestinians believe that this destruction is part of a wider Israeli plot to destroy holy sites across occupied Palestine, including Al-Aqsa Mosque. Balsam Al-Atrash, Litijah TV, Gaza.
Let's cross over now to Balsam, who is standing by for us in Gaza. Balsam, the situation is becoming even bloodier in Gaza. What are we expecting in the coming hours, considering that Israeli troops are withdrawing from parts of the Strip?
Yes, true. This has been a bloodiest hours so far. In the past 2 hours, an entire family was massacred and slaughtered by the Israeli occupation forces when they shelled their home as they were sleeping. The entire family was sleeping when the Israeli artillery shelled their homes with bombs and missiles, killing 10 people inside their homes, including 4 children. This family, Nijm family in the area of Jabalia, was massacred this night, besides 2 other Palestinian homes that have been shelled and have killed Palestinians inside of them. Also, there was 2 other Palestinians killed in the northern area of Gaza Strip, in the area of Beit Hanoun. Another 3 were killed in the area of Beit Lahia. So we have a bloody evening tonight from the Israeli oppression on Gaza, and also the night hours always carry a lot for the Palestinians, and overnight we expect the death toll to rise. Today's death toll was 135 so far, but as the night hours come by, the death toll is expected to rise even faster and higher. Also, there were several attacks on the areas of central Gaza and also southern Gaza Strip, as Rafah is still isolated from the rest of the Gaza Strip and still being pounded by Israeli artillery and tanks, resulting large numbers of casualties that we're trying to keep up with. But unfortunately, since the numbers are really high, we cannot be informed immediately. But there has been at least 20 Palestinians killed in this afternoon from the Israeli shelling in Rafah, including women and children in these attacks.
Well, Bassam, I am going to get back to you in just a bit for more on the situation in Gaza. Well, as you heard there, the Palestinian resistance has continued to retaliate against the brutal Israeli offensive, firing a barrage of rockets against Israeli targets in the occupied territories. The resistance, led by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, launched multiple missiles on Tel Aviv, while settlements near Gaza, including Ashkelon, Shar and Eshkol, were struck with various rockets. Meanwhile, in an alleged redeployment, the Israeli military withdrew most of its soldiers and tanks from Gaza to the occupied territories. Officials reported by Israeli media said it is not a pullout but a remobilization of the military, after they claimed that the ground operation aimed at destroying the tunnels has been completed. This as the Israeli military announced the death of Hadar Golding, a soldier who had been declared missing and presumed captured by the Palestinian resistance during an attack in Rafah city. Hamas's armed wing, the Azzuddin al-Qassam brigades, had acknowledged its fighters staged an ambush early Friday, in which 2 other Israeli soldiers were killed, but denied holding anyone hostage. All right, I want to get human rights activist Marcel Cartier into the discussion. He is joining us from London. Marcel, what does it mean when the Israelis say they are redeploying? And why are they leaving the Strip now after 27 days?
Well, if you look at the chief financier for the Zionist entity, which is the United States, they rushed through resupplying ammunition just a few days ago. The Pentagon put forward this deal. And also in the United States Senate, they decided to allocate $225 million in emergency funding for Israel's Iron Dome defense system. You know, this despite the fact that only 3 Israeli civilians have been killed during the past month of hostilities, what they're calling a conflict. You know, the language that's presented by Barack Obama is absolutely preposterous. You would think that somebody who declares himself to be progressive would actually come out staunchly against the fact that 1,100 Palestinian civilians have been killed, 100,000 Palestinians have been made homeless, over 400 children have been murdered, and yet he reserved his most aggressive language for Hamas, for supposedly breaking the ceasefire. So I think there's never really been an intention on behalf of Israel, which is really just a U.S. military installation in the Arab world, to have any type of ceasefire or a cessation in hostilities here. I think the best way, or the only way that there's going to be a end to this, is with a high body count for the colonial invaders. And it's good to see the resistance actually making some gains in this regard.
Yes, Bassam, I do want to go back to you. Now, as Marcel mentioned, at least 100,000 Palestinians have been displaced. Where are Palestinians fleeing, considering that Israeli airstrikes are firing at even UN schools?
Yes, actually, Palestinians have fled to UN schools after the Israeli artillery shelled bombs and tanks, missiles at them. They moved to the schools thinking that these schools are safe and that they are shelters for them and going to protect them from this Zionist aggression. They also moved to mosques Others use the hospitals as a safe haven for them in order to protect themselves from this heavy ammunition. But unfortunately, so far, there has not been any safe place in Gaza. None of the places that I mentioned was not targeted. All have been targets for the Israeli occupation forces, schools, mosques, and hospitals. So Palestinians, unfortunately, anymore do not know where to go. The UN itself announced that there is no safe place in Gaza. It's not even enough for the replaced or displaced Palestinians that they can't find food in schools, they can't find water, they can't find power, also milk for their babies, a decent life for them. But also the Israeli occupation forces increases their suffering with actually following them to these schools and bombing them again. Today's UN school resulted 12 Palestinians killed. About 4 days ago, another 20 Palestinians were killed in a UN school also, which indicates that there's no safe place, there's no shelter for Palestinians, and they are going to be kept in this prison for much longer until somebody actually comes by and saves them.
Bassam, we do know that you are at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. Now, tell us more about the situation there with the influx of the wounded coming in and, of course, with a shortage of medical supplies.
Yes, the humanitarian situation here at Al-Shifa Hospital is rapidly deteriorating. Today, UN announced that Gaza medical facilities are no more useful and are no more in function due to the fact that there are a severe lack and shortage in medical supplies and in humanitarian aids, and also to the fact that there is a lack in security here. The Shifa Hospital has been threatened to be bombed. Other hospitals also were targeted. Medical teams, on the other hand, here are trying to cope with this large number of injuries coming in and arriving to the hospital. A lot of Palestinians have been killed and not been identified yet, which forces them to keep them in the morgues and in the fridges in order for someone to come and identify them before they bury them. Also, the wounded are suffering more as they cannot find any medical treatment or any adequate medical supplies and medical attention from the staff here. The staff here is not even capable of managing large numbers. The staff here is a small numbered staff. Doctors from remote areas cannot manage to reach Shifa Hospital, so we deal with the staff that is already here. The staff has low number of doctors. They actually are appealing for medical delegations and medical doctors, international ones, to come here to Gaza and help them. Also, the power problem in the hospitals is exaggerating the problem even more, with some of the departments relying on 0% electricity and power. Also, other departments lack water. Water supply is depleted here in the hospitals. Wounded people actually sleep in the yards of the hospitals. They put some mattresses on the ground and make their relatives take care of them as they receive some sort of treatment until they, in the next day, release them immediately, because there has been another a large amount of injuries arriving at the hospital. So in total, this means that, or translate that, the situation in the hospital and the humanitarian situation here is a crisis.
All right, let me go back to London with Marcel. Marcel, Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, said the UN school attack was a criminal act. Now, that's very strong language, but really, are we going to see more than mere condemnation from this international body?
Well, I think that you've seen much international condemnation from the majority of the countries in the world. Yesterday in Washington, D.C., even at the White House, there was one of the largest pro-Palestinian demonstrations that's ever happened in U.S. history. An estimated 50,000 people were out there in front of Barack Obama's house, basically telling him that, you need to stop funding to Israel. With the United Nations, though, anytime the term international community is used, it's usually used to talk about a small number of countries. And the fact is that unless you're Israel, if you're a small country, you generally don't have a lot of say. You know, the United States, the Western European powers that are the junior partners in the Zionist project really have all of the pull at the end of the day. And until U.S. imperialism is overthrown, just to be blunt, you're not really going to see a massive change in this regard. But again, in Barack Obama's language, one Israeli soldier, in his eyes, meant much more than any of the children that have been killed during this conflict. You can see that in his very strong remarks that he's made. But the Israelis, the IDF, PR people, and their propaganda machine, they really do have their work cut out for them because, again, justifying the large-scale assault on a civilian population is just not something that people are falling for anymore. And there is a marked shift in consciousness. I've seen it here in London. I've seen it with friends of mine, young people in particular, in the United States. People are not falling for this Zionist propaganda anymore.
All right, I'm going to have to leave it there. I would like to thank Marcel Cartier, human rights activist from London, and our correspondent in Gaza, Bassam Al-Atrash. Palestinian resistance groups have sent a delegation to Cairo to take part in negotiations with Egyptian mediators in a bid to end the war on Gaza. But with Egypt taking the Israeli side against Hamas, the prospects of a ceasefire that meets the demands of a resistance remain low.
Against all odds, the Palestinian resistance factions are attending negotiations in Egypt in a bid to reach a ceasefire agreement that would end the onslaught against Gaza, at least until the next Zionist offensive raises the rebuilt enclave to the ground. Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, the two most powerful resistance groups in Gaza, have sent a delegation to Cairo to engage in indirect talks with the Israelis, which Egyptian and U.S. officials are mediating. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas had arrived on Saturday in Cairo to exert his influence on the talks. The Israelis, however, are absent from the negotiating table. But the prospects of a truce actually lasting remain dim. A US-UN brokered ceasefire collapsed within just hours after it entered into force on Friday. Even Egypt's mediation role provokes many doubts over the impartiality of Cairo, which holds deeply rooted grudges against Hamas. An Egyptian proposed peace initiative fell short of meeting the Palestinians' demands and was therefore rejected. Hamas is demanding an immediate cessation to the war on Gaza, followed by the lifting of the blockade imposed by the Israelis and the Egyptians, an end to economic isolation and electricity outages, as well as the release of hundreds of detainees. Now, as the Palestinian side is in Cairo to take matters into its own hands, many are hoping that a durable ceasefire deal will be reached to end the nearly month-long offensive against Gaza.
Well, the Israeli offensive against Gaza has attacked the besieged enclave, not only militarily but also on the front that is considered vital in any war. The media is known to serve as a weapon that could determine which side wins and which one loses.
This is what Israeli and Western media don't want the world to see. This is what they don't show the masses. Reporting from the Israeli side of the border is considered safe. Reporting from the Gazan side of the border is life-threatening. Many journalists do not make it alive. A bloodied press vest and a camera still clutched in the arms of a killed cameraman in Gaza says enough about what the Israelis are doing to prevent information from being transmitted to the outside world, only to verify that the first casualty of war is truth. There were at least 117 recorded assaults against the media in Gaza during the month of July. At least 10 media personnel, including 8 journalists, were killed in Israeli attacks, and 38 others were injured in just 24 days. Zionist occupation forces even went as far as shelling the homes of 16 Palestinian journalists. The Israelis targeted at least 12 press headquarters across Gaza. They claim that the press personnel targeted in Gaza just happened to be in their way. But even if the attacks occurred by accident, then what are these for? express vests and vehicles are explicitly marked in war zones as they are protected under international law.
This building houses international news agencies such as the International Chinese News Agency and Anadolu News Agency. The whole staff were sleeping when the sound of a huge explosion woke us up.
Al-Wataniya, a media production company in Gaza, was targeted by Israeli warplanes for its efforts to disseminate news from the point of view of the other side of the conflict. As if killing the voices of truth is not enough, the Israelis have also disrupted the frequencies of local TV and radio stations. Yet the propagation of facts about the war in Gaza has not ceased to ripple its effect across the world, despite Israeli attempts to completely impose a media blackout on the Gaza Strip.
You're watching Al Ittijah World News, still to come. A devastating earthquake strikes southwest China, killing over 360 people. More on that when we return. Welcome back to Al Ittijah World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Israeli strikes on Gaza target another UN school, massacring 11 people as the day's death toll climbs to over 120. Zionist troops withdraw from most of Gaza as Palestinian resistance groups shower Israeli settlements with rocket fire. The Lebanese army says that militant attacks on a town near the Syrian border, which killed 11 soldiers, were meticulously planned. And militants in Iraq turned their guns on the Kurds, taking the country's biggest dam and several oil fields. Heavy clashes are continuing between the Lebanese army and militants linked to the war in next-door Syria. Fighting has so far left 10 Lebanese army soldiers dead, as well as 30 militants belonging to the Al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front. For his part, the commander of the Lebanese Armed Forces announced that the military operation to flush out militants is continuing.
The attack was premeditated, as militants in large numbers tried to surround all the security points in the area. However, the army struck back swiftly and conducted an offensive operation to break the siege imposed on the checkpoints. Today, military operations to restore security and to combat militants have continued, using artillery shelling and air force. Sadly, we suffered the loss of 10 martyrs and 25 wounded, among them 4 officers, and still 13 soldiers are missing.
Fighting is raging in the restive region of Arsal as the Lebanese army reinforced its positions to combat militants from war-torn Syria. The army asked journalists and correspondents to keep their distance from the main road leading to Arsal, with reports speaking of intensified clashes around an army barracks located in the border town. A statement by the Lebanese resistant group Hezbollah confirmed that all Lebanese stand side by side with the army in combating terrorism and any entity that tries to endanger Lebanon or its unity and stability. Tensions are high in Irsal since yesterday after extremist militants affiliated with the Al-Nusra Front attacked several Lebanese army checkpoints, sowing havoc in the rest of border region. The clashes, which were sparked on Saturday afternoon following the detention of a Syrian national who the army said admitted to being a member of Al-Nusra Front, killed 30 militants as well as 10 soldiers. 16 other members of the country's security forces were taken hostage by the militant groups. According to press reports, a Lebanese army unit was able to free a wounded soldier after raiding a house in which he was being held hostage. The raid also reportedly resulted in the arrest of at least 2 militants. The fighting is said to have continued into Sunday morning, with the army reporting losses as it continued to engage the armed groups in and around the border town. According to Lebanese security sources, the majority of the gunmen attacking the army came from refugee camps inside Irsal as well as its outskirts.
We are with the Lebanese army, and Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah used to say that ISIL wants to enter Lebanon, and people who are protecting them used to hesitate and lie. Now you see the result, 8 martyrs for the Lebanese army.
They hit Syria and now they are targeting Lebanon, but in the presence of the army it will never happen.
The clashes mark a worsening security situation along the Lebanese-Syrian border as Beirut struggles to prevent the spillover of the 3-year crisis in Syria. And now as the fighting intensifies, residents in the region will be hoping that the army will be able to restore order soon.
To discuss the ongoing turmoil in northern Lebanon, let's speak to retired Lebanese Army General Ilyas Farhat. General Farhat, is Irsal just the beginning? Are we expecting a militant takeover of other parts of Lebanon?
I don't think so. The situation in Irsal is something special to the geographic site of Irsal on the Lebanese-Syrian borders and the northeastern side, and its proximity to the positions of the armed groups of the opposition in Syria since 3 years or more. There has been relations and between some people in Irsal and the armed oppositions in the mountains of Syria. But when the Syrian army with Hezbollah took over Qusair in the north and the Kalmoun area in the east, the fighters of the Syrian opposition ran away up to the uphills of the mountains, and they, after about 3 or 4 months, they organized themselves and start launching attacks back to the towns of Al-Kalmoun, but the Syrian army confronted them and dismissed them out of the towns. Now they are planning to attack the Lebanese side of the borders. So Hezbollah fighters deployed on the upper hills of the Syrian, the eastern chain of mountains between which borders Syria and Lebanon. What happened is that Irsal is now the resort for the fighters who are running away from the fire of the Syrian army and Hezbollah from both sides. And now thousands of these fighters now are in the mountains that are bordering to Irsal. Now what General Kahwaji said, that this offensive, this sudden offensive of the terrorist groups against the positions of the Lebanese army and security forces was premeditated and not was following the arrest of one of the commanders of Jabhat al-Nusra. That means that those fighters who gathered in Irsal and its surroundings were planning to attack the Lebanese army and security forces positions in order to drive them out and form what so-called a safe haven or an emirate or something like this for all the fighters who ran away from the fire of the Lebanese of the Syrian army and Hezbollah. Now I think they are constituting what we can call a mini Mosul, but it's much different from Mosul because Mosul is attached to the borders to a depth in Syria, the geographic depth in Syria, and to the Turkish borders as well. But here in Lebanon, this so-called emirate or heaven is beleaguered by the Syrian army and the Lebanese army and the Hezbollah fighters from all sides. I don't think that it will survive long.
All right, General Farhat, we will get back to you in a bit. We do know that Lebanon is not the only place extremist militants are trying to gain a foothold in. Now, the so-called Islamic State militant group has seized control of Iraq's biggest dam, an oil field, and 3 more towns after defeating Kurdish forces west of the city of Mosul. Extremist militants captured the Mosul dam only 24 hours after they launched an offensive against Peshmerga forces, the first major confrontation since their expansion in the region in June. The falling of the dam into the hands of IS militants poses a threat to Iraq and could see the flooding of several major cities. This advance by IS, formerly known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, comes amid an expansion bid of an alleged Islamic caliphate in the region and beyond. Let's now bring in political analyst Hani Ali from London. Mr. Ali, this is the first major battle between IS militants and Peshmerga forces. Will the Kurds now be forced to be more confrontational with these militants and cooperate with the Iraqi army?
Well, the information I have is that there was an unspoken truce between the Kurds and ISIS for the first period, and hence we did not see many clashes between the Kurdish Peshmerga and ISIS forces. And if we consider that Mosul to Erbil is only an hour drive, it was very weird and peculiar that there were no clashes, no significant clashes. My understanding and the sources I have is that the Kurds have managed to agree with ISIS to set up a truce for a period of time. It appears now that ISIS have changed their priorities, and as they have done in Syria, they turned against the so-called the Free Syrian Army, then they turned against Jabhat al-Nusra, and then actually they turned against themselves and they became factions. It seems that ISIS do not hold their word, and it seems that they are pretty much a bunch of gangs. But what I would like to sort of emphasize, and I, of course, respect the general's point that was made earlier. Arsal is not an isolated place. The concept of ISIS, the motivation that it creates for those who may not necessarily be ISIS members, but conveniently call themselves ISIS, first of all, to seek and to join that momentum that they might have built up for themselves, and also to have a greater foothold on the media, and we're talking about them right now.
Yes, General Farhat, can I get your response on that?
Yes, but I said that the situation is different from Mosul, because in Mosul and in Nineveh, there are other groups that cooperated with ISIS in order to take over the province of Nineveh, which are the Naqshbandis, the Baathis, some of the clans, the Islamic parties. But here in Lebanon, none of the political parties is ready to say that they will cooperate or coordinate with ISIS. All of even those who are now in March 14 coalition, which they are traditionally against the Syrian regime, and they vote their support to the Syrian opposition. When it comes to ISIS and to terrorist organization, they deny all their relations with them. And really, on the ground in Lebanon, we differentiate between people who are in a civil society or secular parties and those who are in the militant, the militants or in the ISIS or in the Qaeda ideology. So I don't think that ISIS will spill over in some parts of Lebanon. It's true that they have sleeping cells in many parts of Lebanon and they can commit terrorist actions here and there through suicide bombers or any other kind of attacks. But to extend their area of operations or to occupy another area, I don't think that they are able to do it, because from the Syrian side, the Syrian army is deployed in the north part and the east part of Irsal, and the Lebanese side, there is the Lebanese army, and there is another environment of Christians and Lebanese Shiites which are opposing this kind of militias. And I don't think that this game will succeed in Lebanon. It's a kind of finding a resort for the fighters of Kalmoun area, nothing more.
I want to go back to Mr. Ali in London. Now, does these clashes between the Peshmerga forces and the IS militants, does this undermine Kurdish President Barzani's efforts to seek independence?
It probably doesn't undermine his ambitions to seek independence, because the stronger factors like Iran and even Turkey's position has actually completely deflated his momentum for going towards independence. He will probably continue to use the media for that, but on the ground it would be extremely difficult for them. But the important thing here is now we were told that the Peshmerga are the well-trained, well-funded, pretty much US-funded, self-styled militia who turned into a regular army, who were for a good period of time funded from the Iraqi central government, and when Iraqi central government needed them, they stayed away and they kind of decided to put their hands up and just sit in their positions. And like I said, my sources told me that actually there was a truce, in fact, between the Kurdish Peshmerga and ISIS. Now that the tables have turned, they will need the central government's help. When they were asked to help, they didn't provide help. I'm sure the central government will not probably hold their assistance to them. But it just tells us that how weak and fragile this autonomy or this region that they're looking to build up. They had problems in their Kurdish region in Syria, the YPJ. And also, from the other hand, they're laying claim already. If you see so for example, their weather bulletins, they're laying claim to areas in Turkey and areas in Iran as Kurdistan. So from one hand, even the smaller, more autonomous, well-established region, well-funded by the Iraqi central government funds for a good while, has not managed to keep itself and get itself together and stand against these ISIS, and yet they have more ambitions into Turkey and Iran and other areas. The key point here, which we really need to note, is there was a truce between the Peshmerga and ISIS. Now it seems that has ended. We're looking to see probably more stronger, more intense fighting and clashes as ISIS start to find more or newer strongholds. ISIS has lost lots of ground in Jawf al-Sakhar, in Babel, and lost ground in Diyala, and also losing ground in Tikrit. So Mosul is still an area that they hold, and they're probably going to push forward towards north. And if that happens, we're really looking at potentially a fighting that could break out between ISIS and Turkey as they come nearer to the border of Turkey. And if you follow their media, their social media news, they're not really keeping that secret. They are going towards Turkey. Although Turkey has allowed them to go through Syria and has provided them assistance, they are moving towards Turkey.
All right, political analyst
and that's probably their next station.
Hani Ali, thank you for joining the discussion from London. I would also like to thank retired Lebanese Army General Ilyas Farhad for joining us from our Lebanese Beirut studios. At least 22 people have been killed in ongoing factional fighting for control of the international airport in the Libyan capital, Tripoli. This as the country's newly elected parliament held its first session.
According to Libya's interim government, a day of fighting for control of the international airport in the capital Tripoli has killed at least 22 people. In a statement released early on Sunday, it said heavily armed groups shelled civilian targets, endangering thousands of citizens and leaving hundreds of families displaced. The statement came a day after Libya's newly elected parliament, or House of Representatives, held its first official session in a heavily guarded hotel in the coastal city of Tobruk, as armed factions turned the two biggest cities, Tripoli and Benghazi, into battlefields. Armed Islamist groups from the coastal city of Misrata have led the assault on Tripoli's airport in a bid to capture it from the Zintan militias. The fighters are mainly former rebels who toppled former leader Muammar Gaddafi with the aid of NATO airstrikes. Near the capital Tripoli, oil depots burned after being hit by shells fired by rival groups. The 22 people killed on Saturday were the latest casualties in fighting that has claimed more than 200 lives in recent weeks. With its national army still in formation, the country has struggled to control heavily armed factions that have entrenched themselves as de facto power brokers in the transition since Gaddafi's overthrow.
Tunisia has reopened its main crossing point with Libya, allowing a few hundred people to escape from the worsening security situation. Thousands of Egyptians in recent days had sought to flee Libya through Tunisia, but Tunisian authorities initially refused to let them in, sparking clashes at the border.
The situation in Libya does not reassure us at all. There's no electricity, no fuel, all the shops are closed. People are hiding the supplies that they are buying. It is a war situation of the first degree. Random firing.
Thousands of Egyptian nationals have fled Libya as a result of fierce violence in the country. The ongoing shelling in the capital Tripoli targeted residential areas, striking a number of Egyptian-owned homes.
The situation politically, military and economic is drastically deteriorating. Embassies are closing down, evacuations from all expatriates, Americans, non-Americans, Africans, Egyptians are trying to leave the country. The problem is that the government itself is unable to control. There's no state, you see. So there are Islamic militants which are fighting with each other, a lot of people getting killed, and it's really a very, very chaotic situation.
The chaos in Libya poses a threat to the Egyptian national security and the whole region, but mainly Egypt because of the geographic ties. There is no control on the Libyan side, which paves the way for intruders and gun trafficking through the borders.
Egyptian authorities have arrested some 300 of their own nationals for allegedly attempting to illegally cross the border from Libya. The people were apparently fleeing the unrest in Tripoli but did not possess any legal documentation. The arrests signal the tightening security measures being imposed along the Egypt-Libya border.
That crisis with those traps on the border is coming to an end. The armed forces are making intensive efforts to evacuate Egyptian nationals, and I think it would be better to evacuate all Egyptians who live in Libya to ensure their safety.
Egyptian aircraft have since started airlifting their nationals from Tunis, thousands of whom have crossed the border into Tunisia in recent days. As the situation in Libya keeps worsening, thousands of Egyptians have fled from the fierce violence in the turbulent neighboring country. And as the turmoil continues, Egyptian authorities are considering all possible efforts to ensure the safety of Egyptian nationals. Reporting for Litiga TV from Cairo, Karim Azzeddin.
A devastating earthquake has struck the southwestern Chinese province of Yunnan. According to local authorities, at least 367 people have been killed in the quake, while 1,800 others were injured. The death toll is, however, expected to rise even further as search and rescue operations are stepped up.
This is not a site of a battlefield. These ruins are the result of a 6.1 magnitude earthquake that hit China's southwestern mountainous Yunnan province. The massive quake toppled buildings, bringing homes crashing to the ground, and sparked a massive relief operation, leaving rescue teams and residents to pull survivors from beneath the rubble. The country's official news agency reported that at least 367 people were killed and almost 2,000 others injured. State television broadcast footage of people running from their homes and gathering in the streets amid a scene of horrific devastation. 2,500 Chinese troops had been dispatched to quake-hit areas late on Sunday, joining a team of more than 300 police and firefighters. Equipment brought to the area included life detection instruments and excavating tools. For rescuers on the ground, it was a race against time to pull the living from the rubble, leaving little time for the dead. Southwest China lies where the Eurasian and Indian plates meet and is prone to earthquakes. In 1974, a 6.8 magnitude quake in the same area killed more than 1,500 people.
Here's a recap of tonight's top stories. Israeli strikes on Gaza target another UN school, massacring 11 people as the day's death toll climbs to over 120. Zionist troops withdraw from most of Gaza as Palestinian resistance groups shower Israeli settlements with rocket fire. The Lebanese army says that militant attacks on a town near the Syrian border, which killed 11 soldiers, were meticulously planned. And militants in Iraq turned their guns on the Kurds, taking the country's biggest dam and several oil fields. Well, that's all from me and the Al News team. Thank you for watching and good night.